Okay, steering away from the real world, because all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed by the 3 international crises we are facing at the same time, and handling poorly. Wheel of Time! Focus, yes.
All right.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
This is Chapter 6 of Lord of Chaos, Threads Woven of Shadow, and our symbol is the Coiled Snake. Or, I call it the Coiled Snake?
The serpent, maybe, instead of snake?
Sure. Great Serpent. I like that, Aradia.
I don't think it is, though, because the Great Serpent is the one wrapped around the Wheel of Time in the figure 8. This is more of a 4-clover
It's not eating its own tail.
Yeah, this is definitely like serpent in the grass, like evil snake rather than Great Serpent. I think it's for Forsaken. Or Black Aja are the 2 uses for it.
It's kind of looking up at me from the page. It looks dangerous, you know? Yeah, like Shiriam's chair.
Yeah, just like Shiriam's chair. Totally.
In any case, cautiously, Sammael stepped onto flowery silk carpets, leaving the gateway open in case he needed to retreat, and holding hard to Saidin. Usually, he refused meetings except on neutral ground, or his own, but this was the second time he had come here, a matter of necessity. He had never been a trusting man, and was less so since hearing bits of what had passed between Demandred and the 3 women, and Graendal certainly had told him only enough to support some gain she saw for herself. He quite understood. He had plans of his own, the other chosen knew nothing about. There would only be one, nay Bliss, and that was a prize worth as much as immortality itself. I'm stopping myself here because I was wondering if we wanted to comment on Sammael's plans, Demandred and the 3 women, all that, or press ahead.
The Sammael's plans?
Plans that nobody knows anything about, or Demandred and the 3 women and all that. I'm just pausing in case you wanted to comment.
The only thing I want to say is that was the second time he had come here. Here is Natron's Barrow, as we know, in Arad Domon, and we get a bunch of clues about that. I remember spending a lot of time scanning this chapter over and over and over again, trying to find any clues as to exactly where Graendal was. But it turns out Natron's Barrow in Arad Domon, very well-known palace, and she's posing as a sick Domani woman. And I'm curious, do we know the first time Sammael came to Natron's Barrow? He says this is the second.
I don't believe so.
We didn't see the first, did we?
I don't recall it.
Yeah, me neither.
If Aradia doesn't, then I'm right.
And 3's a quorum.
Anyway, I'll move forward here. He stood on a deep dais, marble-railed at one end, where tables and chairs of gilded work and carved ivory, some quite disgusting in their detail, were arranged to command the rest of the long, columned hall 10 feet below. No stairs led down there. It was a huge, extravagant pit in which to present entertainment. Sunlight sparkled through the tall windows, where colored glass made elaborate patterns. None of the sun's blistering heat penetrated. The air was cool, though he felt it only remotely. Graendal had no more need than he to make such an effort, but of course she would. The wonder was that she had not extended the net to the entire palace. There was something different in the lower part of the chamber since his last visit, but he could not see what. 3 long wading pools ran down the center of the hall, each with a fountain, sleek forms, motion frozen in stone, that sent water almost to the carved marble ribs of the arched ceiling overhead. Men and women sported in the pools, wearing scraps of silk or less, while others, garbed in little more, performed along the sides. Acrobats and jugglers, dancers in various styles, and musicians playing flutes and horns, drums and all sorts of stringed instruments, of every size, every shade of skin, and hair and eyes. Each was more physically perfect than the last. It was all meant to amuse whoever stood on the dais. It was idiocy, a waste of time and energy, typical of Graendal.
I kind of think of all that flowery stuff that Graendal does to hide the truth and the manipulation is very similar to what Jordan does when he talks about dresses. And people are like, oh, there's all this detail and you just have to read through it all. I'm like, yeah, and that's where he hides all the juicy stuff. That's exactly what Graendal's doing.
Pay attention.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, that's really illustrated well in this chapter. And honestly, rereading it a bit made me, this is going to be weird to say out loud, feel a little fond of Graendal just because she's so much more clever than anyone gives her credit. And Sammael even knows that, but he's still too obtuse in the end to realize she's trying to give him hints.
She's probably the most effective of the Forsaken. Because I'm just thinking of, like, everyone else is driven by a vendetta or, you know, does stupid challenges, and she's just out there manipulating people, you know, and she really should have taken down Perrin multiple times. Those failures really weren't her fault. She set up some excellent traps for him. It's definitely just Ta'Veren luck that got him out of some of those. Yeah. So, you know, I love her. I think she's brilliant. I learned a new word when reading this chapter. I had to look up. She was a famous and honored, a dedicated ascetic.
Oh, yeah. Ascetic.
Which apparently is someone who is not into worldly goods. I'll read the characterized by severe self-discipline and abstention from all forms of indulgence.
I always think of like the more severe, what do you call it, like a Buddhist monasteries somewhere out in the mountains where, you know, once a week these guys climb down a mountain and hold out a bowl to poor villagers who like put fruit, and that's how they survive. That's asceticism, where these people survive on nothing and they just nothing but the grace of others.
I was gonna say it's kind of like living in I don't know, some sheep herder in the Two Rivers.
They do luxury. Service and ask for nothing.
Yeah, but no, it's a very much a service and you know, no worldly desires of your own. It's all about giving servitude. And she's obviously turned around and sort of rebelled against that.
Yeah.
In the most blatant way possible. But, you know, what's so wonderful about Graendal is her opulence covers up her cleverness. Her clumsiness covers up her subtlety. You know, she uses compulsion like a club to cover up the fact that she's incredibly good with the subtler forms of it.
Yeah, and I feel it's, you know, it's a really effective strategy that she puts so much sparkles in the air with her like tittering laughter where she sounds like a silly girl and people might not want to take seriously, to like super revealing clothing, a further distraction, to literally like naked people who I imagine are you know, when RJ uses words like disgusting or what describe the scene, I sort of imagine like, you know, think of the depths of depravity just all around, just, you know, naked people all over the place. And all the toys and games and booze and distractions. And she brings you there to discuss something serious?
One of my favorite distractions, and we see it a little bit here.
Why do you think she did that? Yeah.
Is she has rings with jewels on every finger, and later she gets a single, simple gold ongrial that's just a gold ring, like a wedding ring, and it really stands out, but she's basically trying to hide it with all the rest of her jewelry. I didn't see any evidence that she has it now. Because if you look, she says, as usual, she had a ring with a different stones on every finger. So there doesn't appear to be any plain rings on her finger, so I don't think she has the ongrial yet.
I'm going to read just a couple more paragraphs because I feel like this really illustrates Graendal, starting with, she joined him at the railing, smiling at the display below. Her thin blue damani gown clung, and more than hinted, as usual. She had a ring with different stones on every finger, 4 or 5 gem-encrusted bracelets on each wrist, and a wide collar of huge sapphires snugged around the gown's high neck. He did not know about such things, but he suspected hours had gone into arranging those sun-gold curls, touching her shoulders, and the moondrops seemingly scattered through them. There was something about their casualness that hinted at precision. Sammael sometimes wondered about her. He had never met her until he chose to abandon a losing cause to follow the great lord, but everyone knew of her, famous and honored, a dedicated ascetic, treating those with disturbed minds healing could not touch. At that first meeting, when she accepted his initial pledges to the great lord, every trace of abstemious benefactor was gone, as if she had deliberately become the opposite of everything she had been before. And here was a word I learned reading this chapter. I had to look up abstemious, or I believe that's how it's pronounced, which basically means abstain-ious, similar to the word ascetic. Abstemious benefactor.
Gotcha.
Yeah. On the surface, her total fixation was her own pleasure, nearly obscuring a desire to pull down everyone who had a particle of power, and that, in turn, almost hid her own thirst for power, very seldom exercised openly. Graendal had always been very good at hiding things in plain sight. He thought he knew her better than any of the other chosen did. She had accompanied him to Shale Ghul to make his obeisance, I believe it's pronounced. Another word I had to look up, which, obey is the root. But even he did not know all the layers of her. She had as many shades as a jagal had scales, slipping from one to another as quickly as lightning. She had been the mistress then, he the acolyte. For all his accomplishments as a general, that situation had changed.
I didn't see any other reference to Jenga. Jengal?
Oh, yeah,
Sorry, not Jenga.
Yeah.
That, as far as I can tell, is the only reference in the books. It's something with scales. Could be a lizard, could be a snake, could be a shadow spawn. No idea.
And the fact that the next line was slipping from one to another as quickly as lightning. It just made me think of like an insect or a snake or something, or maybe a fish that has like rainbow scales that are distracting, or very pretty. Shiny.
Ooh, shiny.
Yeah, distracting.
Exactly. That is Graendal to a T. And now we see a little bit of... I'm not exactly sure how to approach this chapter, because there's what's happening, and then there's what I think Graendal is saying, and those are two very different things.
Yeah.
And so she sort of brings out some of her pretties in the next scene. The Domani King's brother and his wife, and then his youngest sister and eldest daughter. These are all sort of king's relationships.
Yeah.
And this is Asalam, right, who is... we think is dead for a good chunk. We think he's in Natron's Barrow. For a while, he's presumed dead when Rayhan balefires Natron's Barrow, but he ends up turning up after the last battle. He'd apparently been ferried away by Aes Sedai.
Okay.
There is a period of time where his orders got very crazy before the rebellion, when the assumption is he was under Graendal's control and she had compulsion under him, much in the same way that Ravine had Morghese under compulsion. And it was just all the bad orders coming out of Arad Domon. And part of the reason that Arad Domon is in such chaos is that the king has been issuing orders from a Forsaken.
Yeah. We see that at the end of Graendal's perspective a while later. Oh, wait, actually, was it the king or was that the great general? Now I'm forgetting that walks in.
Right, so there's Ituralde, who's the great general.
Yeah.
And he becomes king after the last battle. Ansalam is the current king, and he's killed. He's actually presumed dead, comes back, and then is killed during the last battle.
Right. So she's controlling both of them, at least at some point.
Yeah, later she does use compulsion on... I just said his name, and then I blanked on it. Ituralde, thank you. Yes.
It's one of the ones that are difficult. Yeah.
I will say my bedroom has gone up 20 degrees since we started recording. It is hot in here, and I am sweating like a pig. It is a hot afternoon, and my bedroom is in the sun, and without fans, it's just... and a computer running. Whew. Okay, so forgive me if I mess up my words a little bit. I swear it's heat stroke.
That's okay.
Not the beer or the weed.
Well, no, heat stroke isn't okay. Stay alive over there. But so I think you were saying the next thing we see is Graendal first introduces Sammael to all her new toys, which she more or less says, who are essentially the Arad Domani king's family. like his whole family. And they're her new sex toys, presumably. I mean, I can't imagine anything else is happening here. Or that juggling is where the entertainment ends. This is Graendal we're talking about. And then she shows another group that she's her newest acquisition, she says, from the lands beyond the Aiel Waste. They should thank me for rescuing them. So these are Sharans.
Yes, they are.
And I guess I just wanted to say, I feel like she's trying to tell Sammael what she's been up to. She's like, here's what I was doing before. Here's my last conquest, the demonic kingdom, the entire thing. And here's where I was yesterday. In Shara. Now, why would I go to Shara?
What interest do I have in Shara?
Think, Sammael. Think with something other than your sword.
But he fails. Yeah. And she talks about how she knows every twisting of his mind, and she knows that by showing him exactly what he's asking, he'll never believe she's showing him the truth.
Wow.
Because this is the king and queen. These are the people who control Shara. So what happens? Graendal has abducted the people who control Shara, which means Demandred is currently in Shara taking over the country. He is currently uniting everybody behind him, becoming their Bow the Wild, becoming their Dragon Slayer. All of that is happening while he unites those countries underneath him. And Graendal went there to work with him and to set him up by kidnapping the ruling Shoban.
Right, and that's what Graendal's kind of pastime is. She collects pretties from conquered kingdoms, from conquered places.
Powerful pretties.
Yeah, she doesn't just want pretties. That's not the point. And she says later she can't wait to collect Rand al'Thor. Not that he's pretty enough, but he's so important that he'll be the crown, or he'll be the crown jewel in her collection, because it's about how powerful he is.
And people describe Rand as fairly attractive. He's not an unattractive dude.
Oh yeah, but she's only she only wants like the celebrity level, people who are famous because they're that pretty, or that's kind of the way I see it, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah, that's what she wants.
Do you want to go a little bit into the culture of the Sharans? This is one of those paragraphs that like I read over so many times until the last battle happened, and I realized, oh, this is where we get more information about that army than anywhere else.
Yeah. Until River of Souls, I think this is almost all of the information we have about Shara. We hear a few tidbits, I think, from Tom and from the Sea Folk, but this is the overwhelming majority of the information until River of Souls, the Brandon Sanderson short.
Right. And so the culture is essentially you have an empress and emperor called Shoban and Shofan.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Oh, wait.
Shoban and Shobate. This is going to be tough. But they were puppets, right? Basically, every 7 years, they killed one, and then that one gets married, and then 7 years later, they kill, it's basically a first in, first out algorithm.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll read it really quick. Graendal says, they should thank me for rescuing them. Chiape was Shiboan, I'm struggling too, a sort of empress, newly widowed, and Shaofan was to marry her and become Shibote. For 7 years she would have ruled absolutely, then died, whereupon he would have chosen a new Shiboan and ruled absolutely until his death in 7 years. They have followed that cycle for nearly 3,000 years without a break. She gave a small laugh and shook her head wonderingly. Shaofan and Chiape insist their deaths are natural, the will of the pattern, they call it. To them, everything is the will of the pattern.
The will of the pattern is the will of the pattern. What can you do?
And she's doing a bit of double speaking again, because this is like, Graendal loves this so much because this is the sort of society she's always like kind of wanted to create, where she likes to rule from nowhere, as opposed to someone like Demandred, or even Sammael's probably a better example, who wants to be the big silverback on the block who, you know, if he doesn't like what you're doing, he's up in your face directly. Him, like just himself, as opposed to Graendal, who people rarely see, but is often in control. More often in control, I think.
And this is a country where the Emperor and Empress are controlled by channelers, right? That's the secret. They're secret. The entire empire is secretly controlled by the enslaved channelers.
Yeah, it's the big ruse that the people who everyone believes are enslaved are the people who are actually running the show. That's very Graendal.
And they're the reason that the Emperor and Empress die every 7 years.
Yeah, because who would ever come after, you know, some servant somewhere? It's a perfect way to hide.
And he asks, why would she suddenly have snatched pets from so far away? And I think that's entirely because she's hinting that that's where Demandred is. But also, she's trying to divert his attention away from it. She's basically saying, like, she's putting a big lantern on it and saying, hey, check this out. And he's like, no.
Why would she tell me to look at this if she actually wanted me to look at it? Or, you know, if she's telling me to look at this, she must actually... Whatever she's telling me to look at, it must not be important. I don't know.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yes. A little bit later, you see Sammael thinks again. Not for the first time, Sammael wondered whether the pets were another screen, like the chattering. The chattering he's referring to is how she kind of prattles like a silly girl. And it's all, you know, he knows in part that it's a ruse, that she's not some silly girl, that it's an act. Yeah, she wants to be underestimated.
Again, I have to bring it back to Jordan and the way it writes. There's a lot of silly prattle, but in there is very meaningful, very important chatter.
I know. I hear Sun Tzu all the time when I'm reading this. What is the... if you are strong, make your enemy think you are weak. If you are weak, make your enemy think you are strong.
I like it. We notice that Graendal distrusts Friends of the Dark, and that's because she just compels everyone to do. She doesn't trust their own motivations. She's just like, yeah, guess what? You now want to do what I want you to do. I don't worry about that finicky little loyalty.
Later?
You know, no one that Graendal has dealt with is willing to kill themselves to betray the Dark One in the last hour of their life, right? Like, Graendal makes sure that does not happen.
Also good for that.
I like that obscure. She's secretly a massive introvert. She just, like, doesn't want to deal with actual people, so she just compels everyone around her, so she doesn't have... They're, like, all NPCs.
Later, I think this is when we're in her perspective. Right now we're in Sammael's, but she has a sort of thought that keeps echoing in my mind, and it's something along the lines of... she's thinking something like... She's thinking about her pretties, as I'm referring to, these kind of people who are now mindless. She thinks... like they should thank her. They're so much happier than they would be living their lives before. And that, well, I mean, at least the second statement is not incorrect, which is a sort of terrifying thing to consider.
I mean,
is ignorance bliss?
They have zero free will. They're not people anymore. You know, you can argue that people in comas aren't unhappy either. You know, like they're also not happy.
Yeah, considering everything I was like said in the little monologue that I said before, I was like, it kind of made me think for a second, like, damn, I could maybe like to spend a couple of days with not having a mind. Just drool and laugh.
And you were talking about, like, how...
That sounds like a relief.
You can't be happy without some occasional sadness, right? Like,
well, yeah, how do you know what that is?
If you're always happy, if you're always overjoyed, there's no...
I suppose I wouldn't be able to feel the relief of not thinking if I never knew what it was to think.
You know, forgive the physics analogy, but... you know, it doesn't matter how hot a room is, if there's no temperature gradient, you can't do any work, right?
That went over my head.
Okay.
There's a couple of terms I don't know in there.
So just like you know how he like nope, I got nothing. Keep moving on.
It probably was a really good analogy. I just don't know.
For those of you out there who appreciated that analogy, thank you. For the rest of you, Patrick, go read some more Wheel of Time. So where are we? I lost track. She manipulates everyone who comes to the palace to make them think she's a sick old woman. We get a few clues about it. It's a well-known palace in Arad Domon, inside of the Mountains of Mist.
Yeah, this is inside of the Mountains of Mist. Considerable work was necessary to keep the turmoil away, because earlier in Sammael's narration in his mind, it never ceased to amaze him that she chose to remain here, in a palace, well known across Arad Domon, with civil war and anarchy all around her. But that's what she does.
She created the civil war and anarchy.
It's her anarchy, and it's protecting her. It's so hard to get anywhere near her.
Right, and there's no other powers anywhere near her as well. There's no other threats to her. No one else can establish enough, like, what army is going to walk in on her. There are no armies.
Yeah.
And it's also hard to get to, right? It's within sight of the Mountains of Mist, which means A, you're blocking off that entire direction, and B, I'm guessing it only has, like, one small approach. So it's also highly defensible. I can read from the wiki. It's a fort located in eastern Arad Domon, located on a ridge above water and consisting of tall rectangular buildings built in the form of several towers stacked upon each other, with the towers getting progressively thinner.
Yeah, it's a fortress.
Yeah. And, no one...
Kind of
gateways are a whole other issue, but...
In Game of Thrones, the Eyrie, where how it's just like, hey, you can't imagine how anyone could possibly conquer it. There's just this one narrow, undefended stairway to get all the way up there. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's called the Eyrie.
They have the sky hole that they throw people down.
Shortly after what I just read a moment ago, I also kind of wanted to read, she used compulsion so often like a hammer that one might forget that she could wield the weaker forms of it with great delicacy, twisting a mind's path so subtly that even the closest examination might miss every trace of her. In fact, she might have been the best at it who ever lived.
Until Nynaeve decides to investigate. Her delving is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But she's about the only one who can detect it in its subtlest forms, I think. There's a few other people who have delving that good, but...
She may be the only one talented enough to actually ferret her out.
Right. And the compulsion can be unweaved, but often at that level, it just leaves the victim brain dead.
Yeah.
I like that she needles Sammael by being like, oh, I do like them tall. And Sammael, tries to stand up taller. Because he knows that both Louis Theron and Rand are taller than him.
She knows that it's a sore point.
Mm-hmm. and it's absolutely designed to get his mind back on Rand. That's that whole pointing him at Rand like an arrow. Definitely.
Yeah. This here, I also found some of this stuff interesting where, this is what I was talking about before, where Sammael says, what else do you have to tell me? Or what do you have to tell me? Graendal says about Louis Theron, you never seem interested in anything else. Now he would be a pet. And she goes on. She's like, he's so important. And, he's kind of a babe, but he's so important that I definitely keep him and this, that, and the other. And she's like doing the prattling on thing and bothers Sammael, like you said, on purpose. And Sammael snaps, and I kind of wondered if anyone wanted to say anything about this or you. And he says, Louis Theron is long dead, he said harshly. Rand al'Thor is a jumped-up farm boy, a choss hauler, who has been lucky. Graendal blinked at him as if surprised. Do you really think so? There has to be more than luck behind him. Luck could not have carried him so far, so fast. And of course it didn't. Rand is almost never acting alone, and when he does, it's pretty ineffectual.
Well, I also want to bring up that half the time, the Forsaken are not trying to kill him, right? The Dark One doesn't want him dead. He wants him converted. And that's, like in Star Wars A New Hope, when everyone blames the troopers for missing, trying to shoot him, when they had orders to miss so they would get back on the ship and they could track them back to the rebel base, right? It's not that the stormtroopers are bad shots, it's that they were ordered not to. And I feel like you have a similar situation going on here. That, it's not that they haven't been able to kill Rand, it's just that for a big chunk of the time, they've been ordered not to. And we even see it later where he says, I would have had him in the Stone of Tyr, but someone sent Trollocs and Murdral to save him. And I think it was Lanfear. Now, we know from a quote later on, it was actually Semirhage at the orders of the Dark One, which means the Dark One was saving Rand from Sammael.
Right.
So yes, it is not luck that's carried him so far so fast.
Okay, I'm going to start reading a bit here. I actually didn't highlight this because there's so much here. Yeah, so.
It's a dense chapter, yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, this next couple of pages, made my spine tingle a little. So much good stuff. Sammael had not come to talk about Althor, yet ice formed at the base of his spine. Thoughts he had forced himself to dismiss came oozing back. Althor was not Lews Therin, but Althor was Lews Therin's soul, reborn, as Lews Therin himself had been the rebirth of that soul. Sammael was neither philosopher nor theologian, yet Ishmael had been both, and he claimed to have divine secrets hidden in that fact. Ishmael had died mad, true, but even when he was still sane, back when it seemed they surely would drive Lews Therin Telamon to defeat, he claimed this struggle had gone on since the creation, an endless war between the Great Lord and the Creator, using human surrogates. More, he avowed that the Great Lord would almost as soon have turned Lews Therin to the shadow as have broken free. Maybe Ishmael had been a little mad then too, but there had been efforts to turn Lews Therin, and Ishmael said it had happened in the past. The Creator's champion made a creature of the shadow and raised up as the shadow's champion. There were unsettling implications in those claims, ramifications Sammael did not want to consider, but the thing that shoved itself to the front of his mind was the possibility that the Great Lord might really want to make Althor nay Bliss. It could not happen in a vacuum, he thinks.
Yep. He wants... And that's why I think, nay Bliss is sort of another term for world destroyer. I don't know. It's one of those weird, yeah.
This made my brain do loops, yeah, and start really thinking about, we've had so many discussions about, is Rand al'Thor Lews Therin? Can they be separate? Can you think of them separately, really, even? Or there's so much there, but also the whole point of everything to repeat the struggle over and over and over in so many iterations, in infinite iterations, is that the whole point of everything? Is the fact that is the Dark One saying, "I will end all things," true? Is that a lie? Is that the point? Or is the point endless turmoil?
Well, and I also look at that and say, the Dark One has promised that this is going to be the time he wins, but maybe he never wins. Maybe this just happens a lot. Maybe he never, and we've talked a little bit about how, excuse me, a lot of pollen in the air around here. I lost my train of thought when I was coughing. I'm sorry. What was I saying?
I forget.
Okay, fair enough. It doesn't really matter.
But we were talking about endless war. Is that the purpose of everything?
Right. Okay, so here's my... I think about how the wheel turns and the Dark One's sort of at the hub. And while it seems like every time the wheel turns, it goes to the last battle over and over and over again, the Dark One really only gets one chance to win. Because all those turnings of the wheel happen at once for him. And there's only ever one last battle for the Dark One. And I think about that a lot, especially
outside
when it's
time.
Yeah, what are
that
the
makes
implications
things
here?
even more complicated.
Yeah.
And one of the thoughts that I had while I was turning this over in my mind was, did the Creator create the Dark One, or better yet, are they the same creature? And the whole point of creation is to struggle and fight and cry and laugh and do it over and over and over endlessly. Is that the point?
We do hear a lot about balance.
Is the point that you're, infinite fight? that the Dark One doesn't win and the Creator doesn't win.
And as far as we know, the only two people who talk in all caps is the voice in Book 1, which, as far as we can tell, seems to be the voice of the Creator, and the Dark One.
That's, another thing that made me think, but are they even separate? Should we differentiate them? Is it just our puny human minds trying to understand why the world works the way it does,
I mean, when you look at the series, there's the black and white spiraling together, and we all take it to be
opposition.
And we all take it to be
forces.
Male and female half of the source. What if it's not? What if it's the dark and the light? What if it's true power, one power?
Yeah. Can one exist without the other?
Right.
Like in one of our last recordings, I forgot how it came up, but again, can one exist without the other? Can, if there was a world with no men in it, I think was what came up, then there would be a world with no women in it either. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is the power that Rand uses after the last battle to light his pipe? You can't have
one without the other.
He realizes the Dark One and the Creator are the same thing, and he's able to channel that balance of power and understand that, like, there is no true power, one power dichotomy. There simply is reality, and seeing it as a positive and negative, or an evil and a good side of the power, is entirely incorrect. And once he comes to that realization, he steps out of the last battle, not using the one power as the good side of the power and the true power as the evil side of power, but simply is able to access the nature of reality, good and
creation.
Evil. Yeah, and do creation. There's
more stuff that turned over in my mind, but I'm not even sure what to say about it, with how Rand channels true power and the pipe lighting. I feel like I'm onto something. I feel like we're onto something.
Only 10 more rereads. I was actually sort of thinking about how often I've heard the series. And I was sort of thinking, like, when I was working in a job, and this is definitely a tangent, but when I was working in a job where I could listen from anywhere to 8 plus the commute, 8 to 10 hours a day. And I did that for a couple of months, if not, and you do that and it's like, okay, it's only about 450 hours for the whole series. So it takes about 2 months to listen to the whole thing on audiobook if you're doing that. I was just thinking, like, I have listened to the series for years on end. I was just trying to calculate. Someone was bragging about how many times they've listened to it. And I was just like, I'm not even sure how to count that number.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't quantify how many times I've been through either.
Mm-mm. Anyway, that was just a thought I had. I was like, man, I really...
A lot of what I like to do now is I remember a scene and feel inspired by it, and I go back and I just read that, and then, I kind of taper off and put it away. Of course, we're doing a constant reread as the podcast as well. I don't know. So I don't know how to count that.
And I'll do a reread for, like, a character, where, like, I'll skim the parts that aren't that particular character, and I'll be like, I want to read all of Perrin, or... Hell,
I've never done that before.
or even just like, hey, I want to read just all the minor Aes Sedai characters and see if I can piece them together. And I skip a lot of the, like, main characters on their own because I know what happened. So I've done, like, little things like that where I've actually read through the whole series, paying it, not necessarily, like, ignoring other parts of it, but, like, being like, okay, on this reread, I'm going to pay attention to the Dark Friends. On this reread, I'm going to pay attention to the minor Aes Sedai. On this one, I'm going to try and figure out all the sea folk, And that just gives you something to concentrate on.
Yeah.
When you've listened to the series way too many times. Details. The next thing that I have is basically them talking about the other Forsaken that have gone missing.
Yeah.
And the clue that we get here is that Graendal is absolutely sure that Asmodean is dead.
Holy shit, I did not see that until you just said that.
Sammael doesn't know. They list a bunch of other Forsaken that are missing or dead. And later we see that Semirhage also doesn't know. She also thinks Asmodean is just missing wherever he went. So at this point, like, that gives you very, very few options as to who killed Asmodean.
Yeah, that's good looks on that.
Especially if you assume it was another Forsaken.
Yeah, and Sammael's response to her is, I'm not going to bother to find it right now, but Sammael's response to her is basically, no, you're wrong. Asmodean's with Althor. He's been teaching him. And so basically Sammael's correct up until, recently. We know Rand and Asmodean, well, I say currently, I'm perhaps in the last 2 or 3 chapters ago, were in Camelin at the palace, which is where Asmodean's murdered.
Well, I mean, that happened at the end of the last book, but what they're talking about here is all the events that happened. They're discussing Lanfear's disappearance, which was the end of the last book. They're discussing Moghedien's disappearance, which was basically her being taken captive by Nynaeve, which was the end of the last book. So they're basically saying, hey, it's been a couple of weeks, and these people, these Forsaken, who we've expected to check in, something happened on one day, and everybody fucking vanished. Like we lost Asmodean, we lost Moghedien, we lost Lanfear, and add that to, and that was 3 Forsaken in one day. Add that to Ravine, Ishamael, Bethalmal, Agenor. I just counted 7 dead.
Yeah.
Some of them come back. Don't get me wrong, right? Like some of them aren't dead for good, but that's half the Forsaken.
And I can't remember if I highlighted it or not, but we do get a couple of, I should say maybe a moment where Sammael thinks he sees fear in Graendal's eyes, and I think he does. I think that may be the only thing he's right about in this whole chapter. I'm going to read this a little bit, and you can kind of see it in her words as well. For instance, Sammael starts ranting, I'll kill her, why would he kill Asmodean? I would if I could find him. He's yelling and ranting, and Graendal whispers into her cup, and she knows he can hear him because he's embracing Saidin, of course he is. Always some excuse for her failure, she whispered into her punch, and then she says, choose your own explanations, if you wish, you may even be right. All I know is Lews Therin seems to be removing us from the game one by one. She's right.
Yeah.
I think the moment Sammael thinks he sees fear is when Graendal offers a truce, essentially, and she's like, let's link. It's the only way we're going to beat him. And Sammael dismisses her, or doesn't accept for whatever reason.
Well, I mean, no, she doesn't accept.
Oh, she does? Oh, shit. I read that wrong.
Because he says, hey, link with me. Because she has to initiate the link, but then he's in control. When you have one male, one female linked, the male is always in control. And so, it's this, and I think it's Jordan basically saying, why haven't the Forsaken linked together in a circle of 13 and come after Rand and just taken him freaking down? And it's because they don't trust each other. If all they needed was a little trust, and they would absolutely be able to take Rand down like that. Instead of splitting up and trying to fight and find some mysterious Angreal that they can use to take him down with or manipulate him mentally. But we get a couple of hints here that it is specifically against the Dark One's orders to kill Rand. And if anyone is caught killing Rand, they will be punished. I'll bring them up as we get to them.
Oh, yeah. Here she's saying, Graendal thrust out the goblet. How many of us will die before it is done? We must stand together as we never have before. That was not what she had started to say. And what she had started to say was, what if he is ... And I think she thinks, what if he is meant to be nameless?
Totally.
What if that's what the Dark One wants? He ignored the ice that gripped his spine once more. Althor would not be chosen nameless. He would not. And then he says, then link with me.
Here's the line I was thinking of. It's a little before then. If he frightens you, then kill him. Before the words were well out of his mouth, he would have swallowed them if he could. Disbelief and scorn twisted Graendal's face. I serve the Great Lord and obey, Sammael. So basically he's saying kill him, and she's like, are you kidding me? I do what the Great Lord says. Which means the Great Lord has ordered that he not be killed.
Yeah.
So that's my evidence there. She starts talking about Semirhage. Semirhage missed the last gathering. I don't know why. Do you have any idea why Semirhage missed the last gathering? I don't have any.
Semirhage has been diverted. She's with Shaidar Haran right now.
Sure, she's...
that we see... It's at the end of this chapter.
Yeah, she's torturing, one of the sisters. And that later becomes the information that Arangar uses to sneak into the Rebel Tower.
Yeah, she's on a special mission right now. Shaidar Haran's brought her to a place to torture information out of people, which was slightly terrifying to think that Shaidar Haran thinks that Semirhage would be better at torture than he is. I don't know. I mean, we don't see him at work or anything, but I'm going to shake my head at that.
Hey, well, I think would be excellent at torturing you to make you feel pain. I think Semirhage is better at getting information out of people.
Manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
He's there to they want the information she's got, not necessarily just to torture her to death. Not as a punishment, but as an actual fact-finding mission, as Super Skylick says. I like the fact she takes credit for Bilal's. Again, we get a lot of things we've talked about in the last 5 books. We're getting like a lot of Graendal, confirmation, and this is a chapter that we pulled up, and I pulled so much evidence from, because here we says she was sure Bilal would kill or capture him in Tyr. She was very proud of that trap. So we know a lot of the trap in Tyr. We talked about how the Netweaver was part of that, but also Graendal was a big part of that trap.
Yeah, Graendal and Bilal working together.
Mm-hmm. And again, she's working from behind the scenes.
And she says, Demandred warns you to be careful. And I wonder if that's... And then Sammael says, so Demandred knows you and I meet. I was trying to find if there's anything important here, or if it's just them mistrusting each other more.
It's all them mistrusting. I think also... Yeah.
And then Sammael, so I don't know, this may also be Graendal poking at Sammael and trying to get him riled up again. Because then Sammael says, so Demandred knows you and I meet. Graendal says, of course he does, not how much I tell you, but that I tell you something. I'm trying to bring us together, Sammael, before it is two. And then Sammael loses again, starts yelling some more. It's you deliver the message to Demandred. Tell him I know what he's up to. Sammael has no idea what's going on. He thinks Demandred's somewhere to the south?
Which, what? I was going to ask you about that. What south is he talking about? Not Tyr, not Abu Dar? I
read this over to make sure I'm getting it right. Tell him I know what he's up to. Tell him to be careful. I won't have him or his friends interfering in my plans.
I assume he means dark friends there, because I without Ishmael on the scene, I think Demandred has taken over command of the dark friends.
Yeah. Or I think Sammael might be perceiving Demandred as the big man again, this is so important to Sammael all the time. And Sammael hates that, right? He wants to be the biggest, baddest thing.
The only other thing I can think of is that he thinks Demandred is Taim, and that he's the Black Tower. And the friends are but it's too early. We just saw the Black Tower get founded. He would barely even know about it. It doesn't seem like that's the right. Oh,
actually, okay. I'm rethinking this because from Sammael's words, I was thinking that Sammael is an alien, but Sammael's not an alien right now. So what's to the south of Arad Domon, which is where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps he's referring to the Shanchan invasion. And whatever's going on. Because the next thing he says is, so long as they stay clear of me, his lackeys can carve out whatever he wants, but they will steer clear or he will answer for it. I think maybe Sammael thinks that Demandred is responsible for the Shanchan invasion. And he thinks that Demandred's going to nip at his heels next,
If you want to say that Semirhage is working with Demandred, then technically Demandred is somewhat responsible for it, because Semirhage is also responsible for it. Yeah. And they're working together. So she's there with Tuon. Although the return was definitely something instigated by Sammael in one of his previous freedom incarnations thing when he was working with Arthur Hawkwing.
Yeah, the every 1,000 years thing or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I think it was 1,000 years.
So, but I think the Forsaken are taking advantage of this, and I think that in this case, Sammael, that makes a lot of sense that Sammael is assuming that Demandred is in charge or controlling the Shanchan.
Yeah. I think it's Sammael's I have to be bigger than everyone complex. And he's literally mad that Rand is taller than him. It's just, I don't know what to say about it other than that, I guess.
Yeah, he's got this quote where he says, there was always an assumption that the taller man was the better. and that's something that he really resents, is that, like,
Yeah.
and, as a guy who's only 5'8", I'm not so much, I'm like, yeah, Sammael, you tell him. Just because we're short doesn't mean we're not great.
Sure. But I mean, I think he has a whole complex about it, and
Totally.
I think it shows in a lot of different ways. That's just one of them,
Well, and he's not short. Like, he's slightly shorter than Rand, who's, like, the tallest motherfucker around, right? He's like, I'm
himself as a head shorter than Rand, who's 6'9".
Whatever
right?
you want to, like,
It's a
I don't
freaking
even
giant.
know anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's something absurd like that.
He's got to be 6'3",
Don't quote me
6'4".
on that number.
Like, he's not a small dude. Yeah, he really wanted secretly to play basketball, and when he couldn't, he wasn't tall enough, he turned to the dark side. It's like Asmodean really wanted to be a better musician, so...
and Mesa Anna got turned down for her PhD or something, so she like started murdering people.
And Semirhage wasn't allowed to, like, stick the needle into people while she was healing them, It's, when you look at what the Forsaken, the reasons the Forsaken actually turn, it's often very petty or very personal reasons. It's like, well, you won't let me torture people? Fine, I'm going to the dark side. Meh. Or, we do not grant you the rank of master. That's unfair. I'm turning to the dark side. Oh, that's a different movie.
That's a lot of movies.
Oh, Jesus. But then the next thing I have is she actually turns back to the Aod.
Yeah.
And right after he gives his rant about you deliver a message to Demandred from me. So he's like, you deliver a message to Demandred from me. Da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, these Aod, and it's like the redirection is so obviously her saying, like, hey, he's in Shara. To me, now, in hindsight, having known that he actually was establishing his power base there. And the fact that Graendal went there and took it all meshes together a little too well.
She's leading him, like, obviously. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. She switches like that quickly. Sammael asks what he thinks is a clever question. Graendal gives him a single word answer and then just says, the Aod, as they call themselves, live in their own small towns. What? Yeah. What? And she's just changes the subject completely. Like, not even in a graceful way, She just starts talking about something completely different.
Except it's not, because he's ranting about Demandred, and she's ranting about telling him about the place where he's currently establishing his power base. But not telling him that. It's clever. Anyway, I love Graendal.
I'm liking her more and more.
Yeah.
Rich laughter bubbled up in her for a moment. She herself had always believed in being the power behind the power.
I like this quote. He decides to plant a barb of his own, and he says, do they bind themselves like criminals? Which he's referring to the Aes Sedai using the Oath Rod to bind themselves like the criminals. Yeah. And then a look of puzzlement flashed across her face and was hastily suppressed. And it's clear, I think she's trying to give him a clue, and he's like, it just went right over his head. And she's like, wow, he's a moron.
He thinks he's asking a clever question.
Right.
He's just like, shut up and listen.
Right.
What would you say her motivation is for keep pointing him back at Demandred? Does she want...
Oh, she's hiding him in plain sight. She knows that he's completely dismissing that. Every time she points him out, he's like, well, clearly, the fact that she came back to it is obvious that she's trying to divert me with this Aod thing. And she's being like, yeah, check it out. See? Look at all this money I've got stored out on my counter. Check it out. And he's like, yeah, right. It's not real money. It's like her whole fortune is just sitting there out in the open. It's just entirely. She's just being like, sure, take it.
And she does think, yes, she definitely wanted him to think, and this is a little after what we were just talking about. Yes, she definitely wanted him to think she had some interest there, referring to Shara. If she really had, she never would have mentioned the place.
Except she's playing him like a goddamn fiddle, knows he's going to think that, and that's why she mentioned it in the first place. Because later, we switch to her perspective here in a second, and she's like, he never would have believed that she knew every twist and turn of his mind. And I take her at her word there. I think she knows everything he's thinking. including the fact that he's waiting for her to bring it up again, and by bringing it up again, he immediately dismisses it as something that's important. She is playing him like a fiddle.
Yeah. And at some point, I think this might be in her perspective. I don't think I have too much left from Sammael's perspective.
No. Oh, the only thing I have there is him saying, I've done everything short of surrendering to convince Althor I am no threat to him. Which is interesting, because we talked about how there was the deal between him and Ravine and Lanfear and I want to say Graendal, where they were basically going to point Rand. They were going to set Rand up to go at Sammael. So they were putting the entire Fires of Heaven book. They were sort of pointing him, and I have to wonder if maybe that was without his knowledge. That maybe everyone else is pointing them at Sammael. But we talked about how in the battle wasn't he the one who destroyed the tower, the wooden tower with the telescopes?
Sammael?
Yeah.
Or Ravine?
Well, that was Sammael.
I'm honestly not clear. I'm going to take your word for it.
We don't know for sure. No one has ever copped to it, but it was someone with Sidene, and Rand blames Sammael because Ravine's off because he's attacking Ilion, I believe. Or no, where is he attacking at that point?
Cabriana.
Cabriana,
yeah.
So it's basically someone gateways in, and it could be either of them. It could be Ravine trying to make Rand think it was Sammael. It's also, remember there was the dagger that Melinda tried to kill Matt with, which had the Sammael bees on it. But again, that might be Ravine. So more and more, having read Fires of Heaven, having done the podcast on it, I'm thinking that Ravine was trying to set Sammael up. And Sammael is being like, why do you keep trying to attack me? And meanwhile, Ravine's pointing all these arrows, being like, he's attacking you. So that's the only thing I can think of would explain Sammael's confusion, when in the entire last book we saw so many things pointing at the fact that Sammael was attacking and taunting Rand. That was a long rant on my part. Yeah.
No, and also kind of ineffectually, which I believe is on purpose. I'm just not sure why. So that knife was supposed to go through Matt's heart. But, if one of the Forsaken really wanted to put a knife through Matt's heart, I'm sure they could think of a better way than giving it to a mortal person. And if one of those Forsaken really wanted to blow Rand up while he's standing high up on a platform alone, I think they could have, But why'd they just knock the tower over? Or they're baiting him.
Well, again, that comes back to the beginning of this chapter when
to do what? I'm not sure.
They specifically said,
baited.
Yeah, we are not allowed to kill him. And so I'm wondering if maybe the baiting is so that he attacks and they can kill him in self-defense and be like, I was just defending myself. Because
maybe, or to try to get him isolated so that they can actually capture him.
Right. But I think just from the beginning of this episode that basically the Dark One has given them orders saying you cannot kill Rand unless he attacks you first. Give him pain, give him chaos. But yeah, we're getting agreement in Discord from Jay Conate. How do you want me to say that? Jay Conate? Onate. JC Onate. Gotcha.
They think it was Ravine that sent the Dark Friend with the Golden Dagger to kill Matt. Golden Bee Dagger.
By the way, welcome, John. This is your first new recording, isn't it? We got a few new folks here today since it's been so long. We usually try and thank them, but I see, Jaster, Onate, Nisus.
I saw a couple of names I wasn't sure I'm familiar with.
Not sure I've seen Visible Limit before either.
Yeah,
so welcome to the live recordings. Yeah, appreciate that. We love it when people show up to the live recordings. And you get to see just how good my editing is.
Let's see. This leads me to a bit of reading for the opening of Graendal's.
Sure. I will say this has been a little more of a disjointed episode than most because there's so many single statements that I want to talk about that we've done a little bit of jumping around and a lot of tangenting. But I think we're good. So just so those of you who are here for the first time know, sometimes it's a little smoother than this. I feel like this is going to be a lot of there's so much in this chapter. It's been a little difficult to go smoothly forward.
Agreed. I think that's okay, though. There's a lot in this.
Yeah.
like we were saying. Satanis, we're on Chapter 6 of Lord of Chaos.
The Forsaken Function, as I'm calling it.
Graendal's section here.
I am going to grab a quick beer.
Sure. I'm going to read for a bit. I'm going to go a little crazy since Seth is walking away. Graendal maintained her vexed expression until the gateway closed behind Sammael, then allowed herself to tap her fingernails on the marble railing. With his golden hair, Sammael might have been handsome enough to stand among her pets if he would let Semirhage remove the burned furrow that slanted across his face. She was the only one remaining with the skill to do what would once have been a simple matter. It was an idle thought. The real question was whether her effort had paid off. Shalfan and Chiape played their strange atonal music, full of complex harmonies and odd dissonances, quite beautifully. Their faces shone with joy that they might be pleasing her. She nodded, and could almost feel their delight. They were much happier now than they would have been left to themselves. So much effort to procure them, and solely for this few minutes with Sammael. Of course, she could have taken less trouble. Anyone at all from their lands would have done as well, but she had her standards even when preparing for momentary subterfuge. Long ago, she had chosen to seek every pleasure, to deny herself none that did not threaten her standing with the great lord. Her eyes fell on the offal staining her carpet, and her nose twitched irritably. The weaving might be salvaged, but it annoyed her that she would have to be the one to remove the blood herself. She gave quick orders, and Osana ran to oversee having the carpet removed, and Rashan's remains disposed of. Sammael was a transparent fool. No, not a fool. He was deadly enough when he had something to fight directly, something he could see clearly, but he might as well be blind when it came to subtleties. Very likely, he believed her ruse was intended to mask what she and the others were up to. One thing he would never consider was that she knew every twitch of his mind, every twist of his thoughts. After all, she had spent nearly 400 years studying the workings of minds far more convoluted than his. Transparent he was, however much he tried to hide it. He was frantic. He was trapped in a box of his own devising, a box he would defend to the death rather than abandon, a box in which he very probably would die.
What's in the box?
Yeah, so I think your assessment was absolutely correct, Rand. I almost just said Rand. I think your assessment was absolutely correct, Seth. The whole purpose of this meeting in Graendal's mind was to, at some point she even says, Sammael, you should just run. Like, you're going to die. There's no way you're going to win. She knows that puts his back up, and now he definitely won't run. Now he'll fight to the death inside of his animal trap.
She put that last nail in the coffin of that box.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, yes, box reference, right? Like, clearly the parallels where, like, he's put himself in his own box with Rand gonna be put in a box. Love it.
She sipped her wine, and her forehead furrowed slightly. Possibly.
Can I just say the one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the one thing this really makes me miss is going out to brunch, just sipping mimosas with people and having a conversation. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
She sipped her wine, and her forehead furrowed slightly. Possibly she had already achieved her end with him. Though she had expected to take 4 or 5 visits, she would have to find reason to call on him in Ilion. It was best to observe the patient, even when it appeared the desired path had been taken.
Nice. Yeah, no, I mean, she's using her second, what do you call it? Second age? Yeah. Why am I having trouble with that? Second age, Age of Legends, mind manipulation skills. She's very good at it. She was a psychologist, right? She was like the premier psychologist of the world, and she's using that for evil.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, that she's clever because she's able to help people the one power can't. It's not just that she's going into their minds and healing it. She was using what essentially was manipulation to make her patients better. And that's one of the things I think that makes certain characters more powerful than just being good with the one power.
Absolutely. It's one of the things that makes her so formidable. And it's one of the reasons I love characters like Sorleia and Cadsuane. Although Cadsuane is strong in the power.
How much of that power is actually her Terran.
Oh, who knows? But, I just wanted to make the point that I love those characters so much because they're just they're like, I just see them as like these really tough grandmas. You don't expect it. Or you wouldn't expect it to look at them, but they have this force of personality that turns, the most powerful forces in the world. You never hear the Forsaken talking about Sorleia, but she has this big hand in steering the dragon himself.
That's a good point. Yeah, these people who make a big difference and really make up the backbone of the light side, but are almost
she can barely
completely
light
overlooked.
a candle with the power. Yeah.
Because they don't have power, but they have will. They have
something
determination.
Else. Yeah. She may not be strong in the power, but she's powerful. Powerful force. I think maybe I'll do a little read out, and so we get to see the end of Graendal's perspective, and then we go into Semirhage.
Sure.
A scuff of boots announced an arrival, but not men to replace the carpet and remove Rashan. Ibram was a tall, well-made young Damani in tight red breeches and a flowing white shirt. He could have fit into her collection of pets if he had been more than a merchant's son. His eyes were intent on her as he knelt, dark and shining. "Lord Itarald has come, great mistress." Graendal set her goblet atop a table that at first glance seemed to be inlaid with ivory dancers. "Then he shall speak with the Lady Bassine." Ibram rose smoothly and offered an arm to the frail Domani woman he now saw. He knew who lay behind the weaving of illusion, but even so the reverence on his face faded slightly. She knew it was Graendal, not Bassine, whom he worshipped. At the moment she did not care. Sammael was at the very least pointed at Randalthor, and perhaps launched. As for Demandred and Semirhage and Masana, only she herself knew that she had made her own journey to Shale Ghul and down to the Lake of Fire. Only she knew that the great lord had all but promised to name her ne Bliss, a promise sure to be fulfilled with Althor out of the way. She would be the most obedient of the great lord's servants. She would sow chaos till the harvest made Demandred's lungs explode.
Yeah, Aradia makes a good point there. The Forsaken, or the Dark One, does not mind lying to various Forsaken and telling them different things.
She would sow chaos till the harvest made Demandred's lungs explode. Great line. She sure does sow some chaos, man.
Just
woman gets stuff done.
Yeah. I mean, she certainly has brought Arad Domon to its knees. If it weren't for Perrin's ridiculously good luck and cleverness, she would have taken him out. The whole escaping Natron's Barrow when it was getting balefired thing is just brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much that she does from the background that I love Graendal. Love Graendal. Also, really like the fan art of Graendal. Just put that out to all the folks out there who make fan art. Thank you. Leave it there.
I'm laughing partly at how hard everyone else is laughing.
I'm glad that got a chuckle. And I like the all but promise to name her ne Bliss probably means she is heavily misinterpreting what the promise was.
Yeah.
It's like, if Rand is dead and all the other Forsaken is dead, then sure, yeah, you'll be ne Bliss.
I'm trying to, considering here where to start in the Semirhage section. There's kind of a long intro that honestly, none of this grabbed me very much. It's like Semirhage walking into essentially a torture chamber, like a prison. I think this may be the first time we hear about glow bulbs. So Semirhage's like in a dungeon somewhere, but it's quite brightly lit. It's just a kind of interesting side point.
Do you want to start with how she did hate any who called themselves Aes Sedai? It's probably 6 paragraphs from the start of the section. I think that's a good little 2-3 paragraph chunk.
Oh, sure. To be clear, since I didn't say anything, just to walk people in, Semirhage walks into the dungeon, and there is a woman. She's Aes Sedai, although I'm not sure if it's mentioned yet, who's essentially strapped to a table, like arms and legs spread-eagled, strapped to it like a board, basically.
And I want to give context. This is Kabrina Mercandis, however you want to say that. She is the information that's tortured out of her is given to Arangar, who goes to the Rebel Tower and poses as Halima, and she claims that Kabrina fell off her horse and died, but all the information that's tortured out of her now is given to her, and that's how she gets her backstory and covers up her origins. So this is the beginning of the sending an agent, because we just saw Arangar be reborn. So this is the beginning of giving her a reason and a purpose is, hey, go spy on the tower. Here's your cover story. And so Semirhage is currently setting up Arangar's cover story for her infiltration of the Rebel Tower.
Perfect, yes. So. How she did hate any who called themselves Aes Sedai. She had been one herself, a true Aes Sedai, not an ignorant fool like the simpleton hanging before her. She had been known, famed, whisked to every corner of the world for her ability to mend any injury, to bring people back from the brink when everyone else said there was nothing more to be done, and a delegation from the Hall of Servants had offered her a choice that was no choice, to be bound never to know her pleasures again, and, with that binding, be able to see the end of life approach, or else to be severed and cast out as Aes Sedai. They had expected her to accept binding. That was the rational, proper thing to do, and they were rational, proper men and women. They never expected her to flee. She had been one of the first to go to Shale Ghul. Fat beads of sweat popped out on the patient's pale face. Her jaw nodded, and her nostrils flared as she sucked in air. Now and then she gave a small grunt. Patience. Soon. Now. It had been jealousy. The jealousy of those who could not do what she could. Had anyone she pulled back from death's grasps ever said they would rather have died than suffer the little extra she exacted? And the others? There were always those who deserved to suffer. What matter that she enjoyed giving them their deserts? The hall and its hypocritical whining about legalities and rights. She had deserved the right to do as she did. She had earned the right. She had been more valuable to the world than all those together who entertained her with their screams. And in jealousy and spite, the hall had tried to pull her down. Well, some of them had fallen into her hands during the war. I'll leave it there.
That is such a wonderful view into her mind. And also a good summary of her history, right? Like,
yeah.
I deserve to make you feel pain. Whoa, nobody deserves that, buddy.
Obscure said Black Mirror episode. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Did any of you guys see the meme going around? This was a while ago. I think it was like a homeless person holding up a sign that said, "This episode of Black Mirror sucks." Did anyone see that?
Seriously, no.
Made me laugh.
I really I admire the progressiveness. You know, first they were on TV, and then they had the choose your own adventure episode, and now they just like upgraded to reality. That's great. The progression was very obvious.
I didn't see it coming, but
well, I mean that was the whole point. In retrospect, yeah, but they did something you could never believe, right? So yeah, I like that. Black Mirror 2D was on the television. Black Mirror 3D, you kind of got to pick your timeline, and now we're stuck in Black Mirror 4D, where you're actually stuck in the worst reality. Yeah. We control the horizontal and the vertical. Points if you know that reference. Well, you spoiled it now. Thanks.
Oh,
yeah.
Edit that out. Bleep it.
I'll bleep it. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, she's trying to torture the information out of her. I don't have a lot to say other than she leaves her alone in the dark with the pain, which is fucking terrifying. Mostly the dark part.
I feel like it's probably important to point out that Semirhage, or in Semirhage's narration, she turns pain on in the woman's brain, essentially. And you kind of witness the patient, which Semirhage creepily refers to her as, shake her head, and she's confused at first. She doesn't understand how she could be in pain.
I like the parallels with Graendal, where Graendal seems to be a doctor of the mind and manipulating and compelling that, whereas Semirhage is a doctor of the body and manipulates and compels through pain and stimulation of the body. even though they're both working on the mind. It's interesting, right? Because Graendal is also putting compulsion on the mind, and Semirhage is not using compulsion, but just very simple pain and pleasure.
Yeah, which are probably fairly simple switches in the brain if they were switches that you could turn on and off with a physical motion. But she can do that with the power, essentially. The first sob ripped out of the woman hanging in the air and was stifled. Semirhage waited, impassively. Haste might be necessary here, but too much haste could spoil everything. More sobbing erupted, overwhelming the patient's efforts to subdue it, growing louder, louder, until it swelled to a howl. Semirhage waited. The woman shone with a greasy slick of sweat, her head flung from side to side, flailing her hair, and she jerked helplessly in her unseen tethers. Convulsive flutters, full-throated, ear-shattering shrieks lasted until breath was exhausted, and began again as soon as lungs could be filled. Those wide, bulging blue eyes saw nothing. They seemed to be glazing. Now it began. Semirhage cut off her screams of Shaidar abruptly, but minutes passed before the screams subsided into panting. "What is your name?" she asked gently.
So here's my question. How would Egwene fare against Semirhage? Someone who's learned to accept the pain.
I don't know. She'd last longer than... Oh, God, I don't know. Yeah, I think... Because... Okay, I was just reading, and that was, haunting, terrorizing scene. However, in a moment, Cabriana does tell Semirhage her name. Semirhage starts being nice to her, and Semirhage says something like, I'm skipping a couple of paragraphs here, but that's better, isn't it? Remember, try not to make it too difficult for yourself. As she turned away, the woman spoke again, in a rasping voice, and she screams at Semirhage, and she says, I spit in the milk of your mother, dark friend. Do you hear me? And I think Semirhage closes the door or something, because she's going to go mess with her warder now.
Yeah, and once she kills him, which we can talk about a little bit, but after that, it appears that this woman gives in. Because, again, all of her information, all of her private information becomes well known. So we don't see it, but after the scene, we have to assume she breaks, and breaks hard.
Oh, yeah. Shaidar Haran shows up here and basically says, like, do you have anything yet? And Semirhage's like, well, he's just walked in the door. Like, you have to give me a minute, which is bold.
I don't think she knows. She still thinks of him as just a murderer, a powerful murderer.
She knows she has to obey, but she's not acting like she's not as afraid as she ought to be.
And I like this line. It had been many years since she had felt fear anywhere except facing the Great Lord in the Pit of Doom. And I'm like, yeah, because you're facing the Great Lord outside the Pit of Doom.
Yeah.
Which is more terrifying, in my opinion.
There's some... She goes to visit the warder, and she doesn't seem to think that the warder will be very important. Essentially what she does is she turns on the pleasure in his brain, and then she kind of gets distracted and walks away, and it seemed to me, and correct me if I read this wrong, but it seems to me that something strange cracks in his brain that with this pleasure on, and she walks away, and when she comes back, he's chewed his tongue out of his own mouth. And then she returns to the Aes Sedai, who's lost her mind.
And I think that, what's the saying?
Which makes sense, knowing what we know about the Bond.
I only enjoy two things, serotonin and dopamine, right? Like, she basically floods his mind with good-feeling drugs to the point where, like, even pain probably felt good to the point, and he was just... absolutely, and at some point his brain simply became unbalanced with the chemicals and simply died. Brain chemistry is complicated. I have to assume she's mostly using electricity to stimulate different parts of the brain, so maybe she just has like a little electrical signal and she lets it ramp up, and it ramped up so high that she literally fried his brain with the electrical signal. That's also a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, I think medicine can do things a little bit like that now. I mean, obviously a lot cruder, but things a little like that. Little electrical signals to, stop people's bodies from seizing or something like that.
We're certainly capable of frying people's brains with electrical signals.
Well, that's for sure true.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for a while.
Please stop. Do you want to talk about Shaidar Haran at all? We just sort of pumped over that.
Yeah, I blew right by it. Honestly, only thing that I really found interesting here was Semirhage kind of musing about Shaidar Haran walks into a shadow and disappears after he, like, tells Semirhage, get to it.
And I think this is the most information we get about how fades work with the whole disappearing into shadow thing. Like, this is sort of the canonical... It had nothing to do with power, but on the edges of shadow, where light was becoming dark, a murderer could suddenly be elsewhere in another shadow far away. Long ago, Aganor had tested over 100 of them to destruction in a vain effort to learn how it was done. The murderer themselves did not know. She herself had proved that.
Right, so Aganor uses 100 Murdral to, like, test them physically, probably, and then I figure Semirhage took a couple and tortured them soundly to make sure that she knew that they weren't hiding anything.
Also, do you want me to do the Great Lord voice and read that all caps line?
Oh, God. Sure.
All right,
don't hurt yourself, though.
Let me take a drink of beer first. When you obey Shaidar Haran, you obey me. When you disobey Shaidar Haran... I like doing that. But yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes. That's like, whenever I think of Shaidar Haran, like, that is the quote I think of, is, when you obey Shaidar Haran, you obey me. When you disobey Shaidar Haran, the rest was left unsaid. And I think that's the second time we hear that. She is not the first Forsaken to be given that message. Am I wrong?
Who was the last person who visited Sheol? Was that at the beginning of Lord of Chaos or at the end of...
Was it Demandred?
I want to say yes. I want to say it was Demandred. J. Conate agrees with me. Yeah, with the shrinking tunnel. And I think that was the first time we saw that.
I am not finding it. Maybe this is the only time.
Oh, you mean the exact phrase?
Yeah.
I think it was Demandred that we last witnessed go to Sheol Ghoul. The Dark Lord may have not said that exactly. Maybe just try to search for appearances of Shaidar Haran, because I think that was the last time we saw him.
Sorry about this, folks.
I don't mind. I can tell you really want the answer.
Oh, I think it's Arangar and Osengar.
Oh, yeah. They're, like, waking up.
Yeah.
Or whatever you might want to call that.
And Shaidar Haran is there. Just one second.
Nodding. We're, like, at the end of this anyway, so I'd rather...
Yeah, no, it's just, he says you'll bend to the will of the Great Lord. None but I know, and the Great Lord... None but I and the Great Lord know you live. Yeah, I don't see any evidence that he said that. This does appear to be the only time that's stated in these books. I could have sworn it was repeated somewhere, but so I guess I'm wrong.
I think, yeah. I remember more something along the lines of the character saying, hearing the name Shaidar Haran and understanding what that meant. And then...
Right.
Magadian?
I didn't. Again, a text search didn't turn up anything in Fires of Heaven or Lord of Chaos. So
maybe it was just something we were talking about recently, and that's why it's in my mind. You cool if I do a readout?
Yeah, I think we were just about there when I got totally distracted.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I'll just start there. In Semirhage's mind here. More troubling than Shaidar Haran, which is what she was just considering, were the chosen who had vanished. Demandred insisted they must be dead, but she and Mesa Anna were not so sure. Lanfear. If there was any justice, time would give her Lanfear. The woman was always there when least expected, always behaving as if she had the right to dabble her fingers in others' plans, always flitting to safety if her dabbling brought ruin. Magadian. She skulked out of sight, but she had never gone so long before without making herself known, just to remind the rest of them that she, too, was chosen. Asmodean, a traitor, and so doomed. But he really had vanished, and Shaidar Haran's existence and her own orders here combined to remind her that the Great Lord worked in his own ways toward his own goals. The chosen were no more than pieces on the board, They might be counselors and spires, but they were still pieces. If the great lord moved her here secretly, might he not be moving Moghedion or Lanfear, or even Asmodean? Might Shaidar Haran not be sent to deliver covert commands to Graendal or Sammael, or for that matter Demandred or Messaana? Their uneasy alliance, if it could be called by so strong a name, had lasted a long time, but neither would tell her if they received secret orders from the great lord, any more than she would ever let them learn of the orders that had brought her here, or those that had her send Myrddraal and Trollocs to the Stone of Tyr to battle those sent by Sammael. If the great lord meant to make Althorn a bliss, she herself would kneel to him, and wait for a slip to deliver him into her hands. Immortality meant infinite time to wait. There would always be other patients to amuse her in the meantime. What troubled her was Shaidar Haran. She had never been more than an indifferent Tekran player, but Shaidar Haran was a new piece on the board, one of unknown strength and purpose, and one daring way to capture your opponent's high counselor and turn it to your side was to sacrifice your spires in a false attack. She would kneel if need be, for as long as need be, but she would not be sacrificed. An odd feel to the net pulled her out of her thoughts. She took one look at the patient and clicked her tongue in exasperation. His head hung to one side, chin dark with blood where he had chewed his tongue. Eyes staring already filmed over. Inattention, and she had let the stimulation grow too fast, too far. With an irritation that never touched her face, she stopped channeling. There was no point trying to stimulate the brain of a corpse. A sudden thought occurred to her. If the warder could feel what the Aes Sedai felt, was the reverse true? Eyeing the scars that decorated the man's body, she was sure it was impossible. Even these simple fools would have altered the bond if it meant sharing the feeling of that. Still, she abandoned the cadaver and stepped across the corridor with some haste. Screams heard before she opened the iron-bound door onto the darkness brought a deep breath of relief. Killing the woman before draining her of everything she knew would probably have meant remaining here until another Aes Sedai was captured, at the least. There were barely intelligible words among the throat-shredding howls, words that seemed to have all the force of the patient's soul behind them. "Please, O light, please!" Semirhage smiled faintly. There was a little fun in this after all. I love that, Aradia. That's disgusting. I want more. Yep.
Quick note about that thing. First of all, she thinks Asmodean has vanished, so she doesn't know that he's dead. Eliminates her as a suspect. Also, we get this reference to Chicharin, which, as far as we know, is a simpler version of Shara, which is the chess game that we see Sammael playing.
Yeah, I always assumed it was some kind of... It's like a chess analogy. Or...
I kind of think of her as being like basically a checkers player when everyone else is a chess player. She likes her torture and she's kind of evil, but she's not that good at manipulating politics, to be perfectly honest.
She's kind of, I feel like Semirhage is a good tool for the Dark One, but she's not so much of a plotter, although, she's got whatever she's got going on in Seanchan, I guess.
Yeah, but, what does she do when she, decides to end Seanchan? She just murders the entire ruling class.
Yeah, she's not
subtle. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
She's a bit of a blunt instrument, Semirhage is. That's basically. When she, sucks as, a fake Tuon, even Codswain calls her out on that. She's not very subtle. And that's what he's saying here. That's what he's saying. She's not a very subtle person. She's very much she's a great torturer, but not much of a plotter, as you said.
Yeah.
That's all I had to say there.
I think we hit it all. And I fully intended, I said this earlier, but I fully intended to do notes for 2 chapters tonight, but I ended up just doing that.
Oh yeah, that was such a crazy chapter to talk about and research. That took me, I actually started this morning and I was like, oh, this won't take me long, I'll just knock it out, it's a short chapter. And I was like, oh Jesus, 2 hours later, still doing notes.
Yeah, I wanted to look stuff up and then I had my moment of inspiration. much yet.
No.
That's good. Yeah, we haven't sat down for some time. I think it was about a month ago. I think that was still when South America was on fire. Was that the last time we sat down?
I don't even. The last time we talked was...
God.
It was either a month ago or 2 years ago. I'm not sure which one.
I don't know how long I've been in this apartment for. Another thing that happened over the last month is Julia's, for anyone that doesn't know, my partner's sister-in-law is, she's 8.5 months pregnant as of right now. So also before the world went crazy, they decided to do that. So for the baby shower, she very politely asked us if we would volunteer to quarantine like really hard so we could actually hang out with her and like, hug and drink together, sip cocktails or whatever with the family and, so we could all get together. And we said, yeah. So we like locked ourselves in the house basically for 2 weeks. I just did Amazon Fresh. That's how we survived. But that was a week or so ago. So back to, well, weird normal anyway. I don't know what I'm saying.
Phase 0.05 of normal.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what my normal is until the 20th of next month. At that point, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because right now I'm unemployed. I'm getting weekly unemployment checks. And my boss basically sent me a message saying, hey, as long as you're getting those checks, I'm not going to bring you back because you're making more than you would make here, and I don't really need you, and COVID and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
A thumbs up all around. After that point, I may be forced to go back to work, and that's like, I don't know at this point. I don't know what's going to happen.
No one does.
And if we're forced to go back to work, and then I'm seeing this spike. Anyway, we can talk about the COVID stuff. We can talk about the riots and the race stuff. I'm not sure how much detail you want to go into that sort of world events right now, or generally not.
I don't think we need too much reporting.
Did I say riots and not protests?
Lots. Yeah.
Well, that's bad on me. Sorry about that. Bad, Seth.
Protests all over the world.
Yeah.
I can't think of anywhere where there wasn't some kind of response. And to, taking a moment to find the right words, to a long time coming catalyst. I think this has all been a long time coming, I guess.
Well, about 400 years or so.
And who knows, longer, the power dynamics. Well, I think this is actually a good moment to, the reason I popped in and said, hey, I'm going to be late is because while I was reading today and reading chapter 6, just did notes for chapter 6 today of Lord of Chaos, which was long. And like I was saying, I think before we turned on the recording, the last couple of days, I feel like I kind of got myself back to normal a little bit. I was definitely in a funk. And while I was reading, I felt a little inspiration, and I wrote a couple things down. And I feel like this is more about us and our little friend group book club here, and sort of my feelings. And I'm glad this is a small group. I'd like to read this stuff. And I don't get into anything specific about, politics or anything like that. Just the world being crazy right now, because I think we're all in kind of a tough place, reassessing reality in so many different ways. The world we live in. I still have you there, Seth? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm nodding along. Sorry, I muted the mic because you were...
Oh, no, that's great.
Going.
So I'll just read. Yeah. I love you guys, so I feel safe here. And I'm just going to read this. All right. We were talking a bit before, but it would be impossible if you live on Earth, no matter where in the world you're listening to this podcast from. I know we have listeners everywhere, but it doesn't matter where you are. You can't have missed the enormous upheavals in every kind of sense happening everywhere And anywhere you look on the planet, catastrophic climate change, wildfires the size of nations, diseases that terrify us and destroy our bodies, social upheavals forcing us to confront terrible truths about ourselves and who we really are individually, who we are as separate societies, as a planet, and those terrible realities have a way of forcing us mercilessly to reassess everything us ridiculous humans thought we understood about the world. And having been laid off from my job, as a lot of us have, and cut off from the majority of my normal activities, that put me in that really strange place that I was talking about, really strange mental place. And just feeling all sorts of emotions at once. I felt restless and lost, apathetic and deeply concerned, sometimes overjoyed to have this time to slow down and really consider my thoughts and actions, and simultaneously depressed that my whole sense of purpose and direction in this world, like even if that was only having my own autonomy and making my own living and taking care of myself, all that sense of purpose is gone now. I sit and wait, and that's a lot of what we're all doing at the moment. Although I cringe to admit it, I think it actually took me until like 2 or 3 days ago to realize how shaken that I've been this entire time. I don't particularly care to elaborate much, but it was probably the most emotion I've felt or allowed myself to express in my entire adult life. I'm not shitting you guys. But despite all of that, today was a recording day, so I had to make myself sit down and act normal and read Chapter 6 of Lord of Chaos, possibly appropriate named Threads Woven from Shadow. And as I read, I found myself deeply comforted by the familiar characters, themes, and stories in what I believe to be the finest story ever written. Debate me. While reading a conversation between Sammael and Graendal, I found myself pondering the nature of the creator in the series and the Dark One, and the voice in all capital letters which speaks to Rand in the first and last book. Was it the creator or the Dark One? The old argument. And I wondered if they were two different creatures at all. When Rand saw what would happen if he killed the Dark One, the result seemed just as empty and terrible as what would happen had the Dio himself won a complete victory. In the end, the answer is that destroying one side or another, I think destruction in general, is just not the answer. The answer in the end, or I think anyway, the answer was balance at the end of the series. It's not life and not death. You can't have one or the other. Struggle as we might against that. Of course, I know I'm not alone here, that I find comfort in just exploring these ideas, because us SWAT fans aren't just fans, I think. This is really something quite different. I feel like you guys here are probably the only people I know that can relate to me on that, Like you can be a fan of your favorite food or drink or whatever, but the Wheel of Time just doesn't fit into a category like that. When we read the Wheel of Time, we learn and grow and reflect. We can maybe even change. But you all read the Wheel of Time, so you probably don't need me to tell you. Although I think I needed the reminder that everything changes. Everything is always changing, and it never stops changing. That's the nature of the reality we inhabit. There can't be progress without terrible struggle, and no victory without an adversary. There can't be good without evil, and no love without terror, no rage without fear. And then I remembered something that Watt taught me. That one of these things can never defeat the other, not really, and never forever. That isn't what living is about. We know that's not how the pattern works at all. There aren't beginnings or endings to the turning of the Wheel of Time. Perhaps we can have a tiny shred of hope that this is a new beginning. That's my feels, guys. Thank you for listening.
I'm nodding. You're up on me because I didn't prep anything to write.
No, that really happened. That actually happened. I was in the middle of this chapter, And Graendal and Sammael are arguing about like the nature of reality and what everything means. And I just had a moment.
I think I've been also struggling. One thing that happened right before George Floyd was killed is I actually got in an argument with a woman. And she called me a racist. And it shook me pretty hard. And then the next day, George Floyd was killed. And I've been watching what's been going on, and I've been doing a lot of self-reflection. And I'm not sure the right path forward. And I think a lot of the feelings you talked about are something I've also been experiencing. Just how hard it is to...
That's why I wanted to read that to you guys, because I thought that you might be able to relate the confusion, at least.
And so, and yeah, that's something that I look at myself, is I know that I am not a perfect person. I was raised in the South. I know I internalized an awful lot of racism, and it's something that, I've certainly faced in myself. And of course I tell myself I've overcome, but I know it's not. I know that there's still pieces of it there, and I catch myself having reactions, subconscious reactions, but reactions that I wouldn't approve of had I been thinking about that ahead of time.
Sure.
And then I've thought a lot more about institutional racism. I've thought a lot about my interactions with the police, which have been exceedingly negative, and I am exceedingly privileged.
I hear that too. I don't think I've ever had a positive interaction from the police, and I'm a white guy from a middle-class family.
Right. And so on top of all that, it becomes very difficult to sit down when you have no schedule. You have no requirements. And what I found is some days, I find weeks or days go by, and I'm like, oh, wasn't it Tuesday yesterday? And it was like, it's Tuesday again today. It's like I completely miss a week here and there. And I've been amazed. I've been absolutely amazed. I missed my mother's birthday, not because I didn't know when her birthday was. I just had no idea what day of the week it was. Stuff like that. And I think we're all really struggling with the lack of a schedule. The lack, we were both fired, as you said.
Yeah, as 1 out of 5 people or something like that in the States. 4 maybe.
So I'm stumbling around the points you made because you said them much more eloquently than I did.
I hear you. I found a little bit of hope in knowing or remembering that life is about the struggle. And about, improving yourself and recognizing your own shitty attributes, and all the things that we can't see, because who can observe themselves? We're all terrible. Terrible, unreliable narrators of our own realities. We see what we wanna.
Right.
I'm not yelling. Nynaeve shouted.
I'm a good person, the racist said.
Right.
And it's been sometimes tough to sit down. One of the things I have taken solace in, and I talked with John about this, is just sitting down and editing can be therapeutic, because it can sort of be a simpler process. It can take us back to these sort of simpler conversations. If you'll notice, episodes are coming out, obviously, quite a bit after. So it's kind of fun to hear back innocent times when we still thought coughing was funny, and back when... Anyway, all I can say is it has been... I want to apologize that we've had a break in episodes. Not something we intended, but I think you can hear in Patrick and probably in me that, I feel like world events have really hit us pretty hard, and it's been tough to come back and really enjoy the Wheel of Time, even though I take comfort on it. Yeah, just spending time on hobbies and stuff like that. So it feels like the world should be a bigger priority right now. Wow. But all that being said, I would actually like to talk about the Wheel of Time.
Heck yeah.
Unless you have anything else to share, or anyone else wants to say anything?
I don't think so. It's all about the struggle. Or that's what life is all about. This is my religion. Also, possibly appropriate that this novel is called Lord of Chaos, and like I said in the words that I wrote, that our title today is flipping pages back. I want to make sure I get it right. threads woven of shadow, and our symbol is the Coiled Snake.
Which is often, yeah. Whew, okay. I actually am rubbing tears out of my eyes. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, but we see that serpent is often either Black Ajah in the tower or just Forsaken. It often is just the Forsaken serpent. And this is the Forsaken chapter. I mean, this is 3 POVs from 3 different Forsaken, which is unprecedented before or after. I mean, this is the Forsaken Festival.
Yeah, what do we got? Sammael and Graendal. Oh, and then Sammael, Graendal, Semirhage, Shaidar Haran, all in this one chapter.
Mm-hmm. And references to a lot of other things. So, before we get into it, I have so much to say about this. I want to make sure the reads are short.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No,
because there's
I
just
could
like...
tell this was going to be a big thing.
It's not the longest chapter, but I have like 3 things to say about each paragraph. And if we read a bunch, I'm going to have to like go back and do a bunch of... So when you said this meant that. So if we just, let's just stick the reads, if we can stick them to fairly short.
Yeah, I actually have maybe a pretty long read in. And then I actually did do quite a bit of like, for instance, as an example, struggling to turn a page here, like highlight like 2 lines sometimes that I just wanted to. Here, actually, I think I highlighted this because this was when I started writing this line that Graendal says. And I'll turn her back, come back around to the beginning, but she said, "We behave as if this is the world that we knew, when nothing is what we knew. We die one by one, and Althora grows stronger. Lands and people gather behind him, and we die. Immortality is mine. I don't want to die." And they're having this conversation about how advanced are we really, I think was what she's saying.
Yeah, and also
how much do we
just
really
like,
know?
How much do we really know, and how much are we just people out of time, that we should be gods, but reality, it's done is disadvantage us, not give us the advantage that it should have.
Right.
You know, we've stepped into a culture that people know differently, and you see things like that when, all their analogies are to things that don't exist anymore, and they don't understand bonding, and there's all these weird things, and the world just doesn't make any sense anymore, and I often see this theme in vampire novels where someone who's immortal often finds themselves out of time and unable to connect with the modern world. And that's what kills them more so than any, good guy action or anything like that. And I feel like that's what we have here with the Forsaken is part of being enclosed in a prison for 3,000 years meant they didn't evolve with the culture. And in some ways, that's what's killing them.
Yeah.
Or, here's a great one when you think about what happened if America's founders woke up today and had to, like, walk around and deal with the world. Like,
yeah, I don't think that lasts very long, man.
No.
Yeah, funny, actually, that you say it that way.
Let's ignore all the technology stuff, right? Like, just the culture, just the way they treated people, just the way they addressed people. And that's 300 years.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Aradia.
Does anyone know what the population of the original 13 colonies was off the top of your head in 1776?
Murtaugh said 3 million.
Wonderful.
Is that about right?
I love that you have that off the top of your head.
Right. That's 1/3 of New York City. That's like Brooklyn. Just Brooklyn. Just one of the islands.
Democracy would be a little easier if we were all on Brooklyn.
Yeah, like you could actually listen to everyone. Like if some people don't want to be involved and like half of those are children, then really there's like not that many people to actually, like, you could count the pieces of paper, just a few people.
And, let's be honest, only a small percentage of them were actually counted.
Right.
The landholding white men.
Yeah.
So...
Me and Jules voluntarily fell down a reading about Roman history hole and watching documentaries, and that was fun. And I feel like it gave me a little perspective and a little time to reflect on, where we got ideas about citizenship, what that means and how that worked, and the system that our system is based on. Seriously, take a look at it. It's messed up. A lot of people don't know that Roman citizens were Romans, and everyone in the rest of Italy were not citizens. Nobody, like almost nobody, until much later. And, well, anyway. The Italians were like the lesser,
the true 1%.
Yeah. Until the empire expanded so much that they ran out of citizens to put down slave revolts because there weren't enough of them, so they had to hire slaves to fight slaves. And
how'd that work out
really
for 'em?
read the history, because it sounds a hell of a lot like ours.
Oh, don't tell me that. Oh, what is it about history repeating itself? Something about a wheel of
I say a hell of a lot, dim reflections across thousands of years, of course, but made me think. Gives you perspective.
I'm somewhat pessimistic on the current state of the Union.
I think we need to make a lot of changes. But in the words of Tyler Durden, all those old people are dead now. This is our world. Let's make it
Soon,
the way we want it.
Patrick. Soon. Oh, Jesus. No, Okay, steering away from the real world, because all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed by the 3 international crises we are facing at the same time, and handling poorly. Wheel of Time! Focus, yes.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
Support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?